So the F1 film released in cinemas in the UK today, and here's everything you need to know. First of all, the cinematography. The cinematography was absolutely stunning. Like, all the camera angles, all the scenes, absolutely stunning. And the way they incorporated it into actual race weekends, used the crowds there, absolutely brilliant. Now the story. The story was obviously quite a typical Hollywood story of the team is failing and then something happens, they bring in the old guy, and over time, by the end, it all works out and it's a success story. But obviously, while that was quite stereotypical, it had some cool twists in it, which I'm not going to talk about here in case you haven't watched the film. If so, click off this and go watch the film right now. But yeah, it was a decent story overall, maybe a 6 out of 10 story. The accuracy. So I'd say, given that Lewis Hamilton was one of the producers of the film was relatively accurate with all the workings of the team and things. But there are some things only a mega fan will really pick up on. Little things like when Sonny Hayes and Joshua Pearce were walking through the paddock, they didn't get stopped for a photo once. Like, tiny things like that. But also, Brad Pitt in this film was driving like 2024 K-Mag on cocaine. He would have got a race ban quicker than George Russell got turned into at Abu Dhabi in the film. Which brings me on to the next point. That is realistic. Of course, George Russell got turned into by Brad Pitt.
He just fully turned into
Another little tiny thing that only F1 neeks like you and I might pick up on is the constant livery changes, especially with like the main teams such as Mercedes and Ferrari, because the Red Bull livery's been the same for the last 10 years now. But like little things, like given the film was being filmed during the 23 and 24 season, there was obviously little livery changes and suit changes and obviously driver changes, like Nick de Vries showed up in a bit. But yeah, little things like that most people wouldn't notice, but we would. Other cameos. The F1 movie had tons of cool cameos, from Stefano Domicili, the FIA president, to Toto Wolff, Fred Vasseur, Zach Brown, all the F1 drivers at various points. Roscoe Hamilton, that was a big cameo, and he even got a mention in the credits, which I love, to be honest. And also then your classic Will Buxton doing some yapping as normal Drive to Survive. There was also tons of cameos and cool voice lines from Crofty and Martin Brundle, constantly explaining things to the non-F1 fan viewership of this film, which, yeah, I rate, to be honest. Like, getting more fans into the sport is good, and using such recognisable names and faces such as them is quite good. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this video is the realism of the crashes. Obviously, all the little crashes that Sonny Hayes and Joshua Pearce had were really realistic, like chipping off of the front wing or whatever. All the big one, like at Vegas, which, by the way, Sonny Hayes would not have been allowed to race in Abu Dhabi after that one. And also, that's another thing for the accuracy. You can't, as we learnt this year with Stroll in Spain, you can't put a driver into the race if they haven't competed in quali. But yeah, little things like that. Anyways, back to what I was talking about. There was lots of little crashes which are reasonably realistic, but the big ones were also, as goofy as Joshua Pearce's Monza crash looked, that was actually very heavily based on Alexander Peroni's crash in F3 in Monza 2019, where he hit a sausage curb at Parabolica and flew up into the air, similar to Joshua Pearce in the film. And then obviously his car blew up like Grosjean's did in Bahrain 2020. Now, the other main crash was Sonny Hayes' supposed big crash in the 90s, which is a carbon copy of Martin Donnelly's Helles crash in 1991, whereas they even showed the footage of Martin Donnelly lying in the middle of the track, still attached to his seat, and Martin was even credited in the credits for giving the film permission to use his crash, which I, to be honest, love. But let's also be honest here, because as cold as this picture may be, it's nowhere near as cold as these two. So all in all, the F1 film was a masterpiece, I'd say. It wasn't entirely realistic, but it was never going to be, and it was realistic enough for the F1 superfan to enjoy it, and Hollywood enough for everyone to enjoy it. So for once, Hollywood, big thumbs up from me. But also let me know your thoughts on the F1 movie down in the comments.
Buddy is literally quitting on the person way. Literally hitting the person like pretty.